Welcome, my name is Tamsin Russell and I work at the Museums Association. I'm a cis-white 50-year-old woman with a blunt fringe, red lipstick and black glasses. It is my delight to welcome in today's session. The session will be recorded, so it will be available on our website at the end of November. If there are any insights that you'd like to share more widely, please do use #Museums2021. And if the slides are of interest to you, you can email us at cpd@museumsassociation.org and we can send you all of the slides. Before I get started, I really want just to highlight that today's session isn't a silver bullet to address the issues of not being well in the sector. I also want to state very clearly for the record that whilst lots of organisations often think the response to workforce wellbeing should be the implementation of resilience workshop, resilience shouldn't be worn as a badge of honour. That's not something we should necessarily be proud about. But what I would say is it is a skill set in its own right. And actually, whether we're talking about being resilient at work or at home, to understand what helps you be resilient in situations can be helpful, but it's certainly not the tick box approach that everyone else can go, thank goodness we have a resilience intervention. For those of you that attended my session yesterday, which was all around workforce wellbeing and exploring psychological hazards at work, that was very much from a sector lens, an organisational lens. But today we're going to focus very much at the individual level. And the reason I feel this is important, and we will explore it in more detail, is that well-being is different for all of us. And to understand and appreciate what well-being means for you enables you to identify where those rubs are, where those sources or experience that may affect your level of well-being negatively. So in the time we have together, I'm going to give you some concepts to reflect upon. I'm also going to give some sort of prompts in terms of exercises that you can do now in real time, at home or in this space. Or you might want to go home and think about them in more detail when you're in that space. So, without further ado, let me get started. So, I love definitions. Most people know this about me, but I do think it's a really good starting point. So, if you're looking at a definition of well-being, it's this concept of state, of being comfortable, healthy or happy. Now the word state is really important because what that indicates is that there is a dynamic nature around well-being. So it will fluctuate, and that fluctuation will depend on a variety of things. So one of the things I would always ask people to think about is look at the factors that you know affect your well-being, and they will be different for every single person in this room. So think about that. What are the first three that come to mind? And we'll be exploring this further on. Often the factors that affect your well-being are a function of your individual difference. Again, I've got a definition of what individual difference might be. So things that make us different from one another, that could be something like our values, our personality. Often it is a function also of lived experience. I'm an identical twin. So we have lots of things in common. However, how we've both led our lives are different. So even at that level, how we respond to different situations and events that might well affect our well-being will be different. So whilst all of us may subscribe to the concept of being healthy and well, our own definition of well-being is important, and how we respond to that is a function of who we are individually. So another exercise for you. How would you rate your well-being at the moment? So I've got a numeric rating scale, but equally you could have a smiley face, sad face, screaming face, anything that you want to do. The reason why it's important for you to think about the extent and the measure of your well-being is because what it will enable you to do is identify, if you've not already been able to do that, what are the precursors, what are the factors that are affecting any of those fluctuations. So doing a well-being log can be really, really helpful because what it enables you to do is look for trends and patterns. So is it about a particular time in the year? Is it about if you've not been given information or if you have had to do a particular piece of work? So understanding, first of all, what might be the factors that affect your well-being is a really good starting point. Then looking at how that fluctuates by reflecting on your well-being with some sort of rating scale can also give you an idea about whether there are any trends or patterns. And when you've got those trends or patterns, you can then take a step back and again, in more detail, identify, is there anything that's going on? So in terms of lived experience, this is essentially thinking about any events or situations that will have affected you. I'm going to talk a little bit about locus of control, one of my all-time favourite things, and then personal context. So in terms of lived experience, an exercise that you can do, and it's a timeline exercise. So this can be a function of doing a wellbeing journal or log, diary that I've already talked about, but equally can be about where you are now and then looking back over the course of your life. And it could well be there has been a particular situation or event that means that you're more sensitised to other things that affect your well-being. So I'll give you an example. And I spoke about Sticks and Stones research yesterday in terms of if you're on the receiving end of being bullied, if you're a target in a bullying situation, what that then might mean is that when you're presented with similar situations, similar behaviours, you see those as red flags. You become hypersensitised, hypervigilant. So the reason that I might respond to exactly the same situation in a different way to somebody else sitting next to me is that my lived experience to date has meant that I go into that situation with a slightly different approach, expectation or terror, depending on what that situation is. So timeline exercises can be really helpful to enable you to look back over what may well have happened. Now, obviously, this is not a psychotherapy class, but it does enable you to take a step back and think about what might well have happened in the past that's affecting how you're responding in the present. The other important thing is around personal context, and I often use this when I'm talking about careers. So if anyone was here for the Career Crossroads conversation, this is also part of this. When we talk about workforce well-being, or often when we talk about stress, there tends to be a focus on how is that mediated through the work environment? And what I want to sort of highlight really is that as individuals, we operate in a number of different life domains. So I have this, my sense of self. Who am I? I'm an ageing woman. Okay? I have my sense of work and career and what's going on there. I might have relationships, and I'm one of the sandwich generation, so I have children that are still demanding and parents that are becoming increasingly demanding. So what's going on with those relationships? And then I also have other family responsibilities. So the reason I highlight this is that your ability to potentially deal with well-being in the workplace may also be affected by what you're dealing with in the other three domains. And it's really important to understand that push and pull, understand the direction of travel, because it could well be that the work domain is being affected unduly from outside forces. Equally, your outside of work space might be being affected unduly by what you're experiencing at work. And so to understand that push and pull is really important. So I'm going to introduce this concept of locus of control. And again, this is a really nice exercise for you to start thinking about, which is the extent to which you believe you have control over the outcome of events in your life. And again, 0 to 5. Never, I have no control. Rarely, sometimes, it depends. The majority of situations, you might have a sense around your ability to control things. This particular theory was posited by an academic, a psychologist, a management thinker, Julian Rotter. And this is around the extent to which we have our own agency. The reason this is important when you're thinking about well-being is it's about the extent to which you feel you can then take control and make change. And it's a really interesting approach because often people that have an external locus of control feel as if everything happens and it is beyond their control. That can be hugely freeing in a way. Whereas if you're a person that has an internal locus of control that feels that you have done in the past and so you should do now, be able to determine your course of action. When that isn't there, that can have far more significant impact on your ability to see what your next steps are, your ability to feel in a good place. So reflect on the extent to which you're more looking at being able to direct and focus your attention. You have an internal locus of control, or you might be somebody that feels as if things happen for a reason. And it's when those things slightly change, in terms of an internal person, that you may feel that things are out of your control, and it is felt more deeply. When we're talking about control, I think it's also important about the concept of uncertainty. And again, here's the definition, so we're all on the same page. So there's a doubt about the future or about what is the right thing to do. And I think this can be affected by a variety of different things. It could be affected by decisions that you've made in the past that perhaps haven't panned out. It could be that there's a plethora of information that you're trying to go through and work out what it's about. But understanding where your sources of uncertainty come from is important. And again, you might want to reflect on that life domain. So where's there certainty and where's there uncertainty in terms of your role? And what can make things more certain in the future? Is there anything you can do differently to increase that certainty? When we're talking about well-being or stressors, either in the workplace or outside of the workplace, there's two, I suppose, interesting principles to think about. And it's the extent to which we might adopt coping mechanisms, and the clue's in the title. So that might be things that we might do to get us over the hump. That could be around focusing on the minutiae. It could be going to get a glass of wine. It could be about a whole raft of different things. And a coping mechanism is good. It can get you over that bump, but only for an amount of time. And that's why it's important to think about how long is your well-being being compromised. Because if you're adopting potentially maladaptive coping mechanisms, it's just the 3 bottles of wine this week, you need to be thinking about how that's affecting your long-term health and well-being, and how you might need to think about perhaps moving your coping mechanism into a controlling mechanism. So controlling mechanisms enable you to take control of the situation. Shocker. It addresses the situation at source, but it may not always be possible. So one of the things I think can sometimes be helpful, and I talked about this yesterday with a very sensitive clicker, is the Health and Safety Executive Stress Management Regulations. And they suggest that certainly from a well-being perspective, you can reflect on the following elements associated with work. So they highlight, is it demands that are affecting your well-being? So is it that workload? And interestingly enough, sometimes not having enough work can be as much of a stressor as having too much work. And I certainly heard that from people that were on furlough during the last 20 odd months, where actually this was far more stressful for them because they weren't being involved, they weren't being connected, they weren't doing those things. I've already talked about control, but I think within our organisations that's important, especially if you've changed organisations or there's been a change of leadership at the top of your organisation, where perhaps you have been given autonomy in the past and that's now been removed. Or maybe the culture has changed, so it's less participative. So how much control you have in terms of the way you do your work. We often see this being as a big issue if you're in a very focused area of work where there are clear standard operating procedures. For example, operational roles or front of house roles where you have to follow things to a particular letter. Other things organisations can put in place or need to be aware of is around this concept of support. So do you feel you're doing all of this alone without anybody either noticing that you're not coping or giving you encouragement and support to help you? Relationships are seen as a really important potential stressor. And again, taking a step back and utilising this framework to understand the relationships that are strong and positive and constructive in your working space, and the relationships that are perhaps less positive, maybe broken down, and may enable you to then think about what that means and how you can navigate it. Role clarity is a big one if you're looking at health and safety legislation. And I think, again, this is a real question mark for the sector, where we have seen redundancy programmes, meaning that roles have merged. So we're already worrying about work demands, okay? And the fact that there may not be as much clarity about where you're investing your time and effort. So if you don't know what you are having to do, and you are getting mixed messages from multiple leaders or funders, or whatever it might be, understanding what you're required to do is really important. So again, what this framework enables you to do is just take a step back and use this as a way of thinking about where are those rubs, where are those tensions in terms of my working life. And the last one, change, how organisational change, large or small, is managed. I've done lots of change management, and the thing I always know is that change is in the eye of the beholder. And often I know that people that are involved in change management programmes have been sitting with that change and planning that change for months. So guess what? When it gets to being implemented, they feel that it's fine because they got used to it. But what they're not doing is remembering it's the first time you've ever heard it. And they expect everyone to quickly catch up. So is it about how a particular change is managed within your organisation? So what have I highlighted in the time that we've had together so far? I think there are some really important things that you can do. I do think personal reflection is really, really helpful, and using any sort of framework to help you understand how you're feeling can enable you to get really to the heart of the matter. I think reflecting on how you're feeling, so I used the emotions wheel yesterday, but the emotions wheel is a technique where you can name the emotions you're feeling, and that can be really liberating. It enables you to say, this is how I feel. It enables you to articulate to people, this is how I feel. And it also enables you then to think about how you're going to manage those emotions. And for the record, emotions are a good thing. All emotions tell us is that this is important to us. It's a different form of communication, and it's nothing to be embarrassed about. Reflection on those triggers and trends I've already spoken about at length. Thinking about how you can decrease uncertainty, if that's one of the key sources of where your well-being might be affected, is important. So that information gathering, having a look outside, how can you try and get as much transparency in your organisation as possible? You might want to physically take control or influence where you can, or accept some of the things that you can't change, that old wisdom, that old nugget about what you can change and what you can't change. Because you're not going to be able to take control of everything. But that might well then be a decision about whether this is the right organisation for you, if you have that luxury. And I appreciate that is a luxury. What this enables you to do is to make some informed decisions about your next steps, either within your organisation, but also about your own care. What I do know, even if you are not progressing or moving forward sort of physically in your career or in your pursuits or your professional development, but doing this reflection, investing this time, does enable you to feel as if you're moving towards your goals, because you're getting clarity about what's important to you and what's not important to you. Self-care, be kind, rest, exercise, connect, learn, all of those 5 ways to well-being are there for a reason. They're tried and tested. So please look, on NHS websites, Mind websites, all have a lot of different approaches, again, that might well work for you. And the reason I say different approaches is that all of us come to this, as I've said before, from an individual perspective. So you might find the 5 ways to well-being great for you, and that might work for you. But you equally might be the person that needs to have that very specific stress management regulations. We all come from this from different areas. That's bringing me to the end of my presentation. What I should say is we have a Wellbeing Hub on the Museums Association website. We're always looking for more content to put on there. So some of the content that I've already started writing down as a function of some of the conversations I've had over the last few days is around the concept of well-being and the menopause. I've also talked about the concept of compassionate leader and also chronic health issues, which I think as a sector we also need to start thinking about how do we manage those as line managers and beyond. fantastic. Go to a website close to you. So that brings me to the end. If you want copies of the slides or you'd like to have a more detailed conversation with me about wellbeing in the broader sense, something that can help us develop more resources to help you, Workforce is a campaign and a delivery area for the Museums Association. We have committed to developing a workforce wellbeing strategy within our next strategic framework. So this is an area of specific work that we're going to be adding new layers, research and interventions on. So if this is something that you would like to get involved with or something you would like to give us feedback on, I really would welcome that. So that's the end of my presentation. I think I've probably got about 10 minutes to go. So does anyone have any questions? But with the caveat that I know that this might be a difficult subject to talk about in an open forum.
Hello.
Hello.
Is it on? Is it just, yeah, I'm just not actually putting it to my face. A question about how do people speak with their organisations about concerns if there's no dedicated HR? So in a lot of smaller organisations, there's no one that's kind of separate from the day-to-day. So when you raise concerns, you're doing it to people that are very much in that hub as well. So often from my experience, people I know's experience, you get the, yes, we're all stressed. And you're like, okay. And that's the end of the conversation. Yeah. So like, do you have any advice for people that are in organisations that don't have HR and, you know, separate people to try and get the advice and get listened to and not get that response back of, yes, we're all busy though, or we've all got too much, or we all do 10 hours more a week than we're paid for?
I think it's a really good point. And I remember, and this is not my best self, when someone told me once they were stressed, I said, you don't know the meaning of the word stressed. I think maybe I might also have been stressed at that particular point in time. I think it's a real issue. I think we don't focus enough on management development to tackle this. So I was talking about somebody earlier today, and when I manage people, I don't manage people at the moment, but the first thing I would do in their first 4 weeks is I would send them some questions, which was, how do I know if the demands are affecting you? What are your symptoms of stress? What should I look out for? I might also ask questions around what motivates you, or, you know, how have you best been managed in the past? I also used to introduce the stress management regulations, so I opened that door. You do not need an HR department to open that door for conversations. But I appreciate when people are feeling overwhelmed themselves, they do exactly as I did. You don't know the meaning of the word. I think there is something about saying, look, this is who I am, this is what then will happen if this isn't addressed. So it's almost around, which sounds ridiculous, doesn't it? Painting the worst case scenario, really, is that I'm highlighting this to you. You have a duty of care. I want you to support me. It's a legal requirement if we want to get that pedantic. But actually, other than that, apart from me there being an ethical and moral requirement, we won't be able to do this and this piece of work if I'm not here. And let's not get to that point where I'm not here. And I think that often you need to raise this that first point where you can talk about it perhaps without getting, I was going to say overly emotional, having just said that emotion's good, but you know, so you can actually be able to articulate what you say in a clear and meaningful way. I think the other thing we need to think about is that lots of our organisations are managed by trustees and boards. It is their duty of care as well. They are accountable for the health and well-being of the organisation, and that is financial as well as the workforce. So there's something around how is your trustees set up? Do they have dedicated sponsor trustees? Sometimes that's the case, and somebody's the financial person, somebody's a workforce person. Do they have any subcommittees that look at workforce or well-being? Are they going for any other awards? So I'm in Scotland, and you can go for particular awards about being a healthy and safe working organisation. So there might be some things around trying to influence their commitment to enable them to make change. All right. So that's what I would say, but it's not easy. But I think it's just about saying, taking a step back and say, yeah, I appreciate we're all doing lots of working hours, but I need your help. And being really clear about it. And I would highlight very clearly, we are a unionised sector, so if a union is recognised or a union member, there's often a huge amount of support there as well. And you might be able to get that on one of the agenda items for sort of a management conversation, with or without an HR department. Is that okay? I think we've got another question at the back.
Hello. It's on. Yesterday I was doing some weird echo, so it's okay now. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, thank you for that, Tamsin. I've got the concept. I will do my best to turn it into a question to help you. So what I'm kind of thinking, putting on my typical lens when looking at your well-being and whatnot, is that there would often be more nuanced issues when it comes to people with autism, with neurodiversity. And these could range from, understanding it, having that agency, as you were saying, and advocacy. So I just wonder if, well, without sounding rude, if it's enough, because there's obviously another element there which I think a voice needs to be represented or advocated for more, because especially, like, as you can tell, as you are witnessing right now, to put into words what you're trying to express comes across is quite difficult to do. So, and imagine that in the scenario of well-being and bullying. That's quite good. I actually did what I was demonstrating, trying to say. As you can tell, I'm struggling to put into words right now. So I suppose to summarize, what would you say in response to how this could be, you know what I mean, in sort of altered, not altered, applied for that, thank you to the person there, in that context? Because I think that's, to me, quite important, and especially as a lot of neurodiverse people would be perhaps more of a target as they're more susceptible.
So I think you're right, and that's covered by that individual difference. And that's why it's important to have those dialogues with whom you're working with around what might be more specific for you. So, for example, if you are a person that likes to have really clear goals and instructions and everything buttoned down a week before, to work in an environment that is fly by their seat of the pants can be an additional stressor for you. Now, that might be a function of someone being neurodivergent. It might be a working preference as well. So any of those individual differences that affect your ability, our ability to work effectively and safely and happily in the workplace should be communicated. If that communication is more elongated, then what individual managers and organisations should do is be patient, give you time, not interrupt, and then carry on.
Yeah.
I've got a question at the back from a house.
I've got, there's a question here from an online delegate. We do have 1 minute, so I'll make it quick. It's from Karen Jameson. She asks, how can you start a conversation about your well-being with a senior leader?
Remember, they're a human being. It shouldn't be any different. And they have your well-being as part of their responsibility.
Thank you.
I think that's bringing me to the end of the time. I know there was another question there, but I can pick up on that question after the fact. I'm still here for another 20 minutes. But other than that, thank you so much for your time and attention. Please get the slides if you want them, and we're always here. So please email me. Thank you so much.